Welcome on in, everyone. It's Malliem back with another weekly horror story. Today we're adding Citadel, Part 1, to the library. Leave a comment if you want me to continue the series, and don't forget to sub if you don't want to miss the next one. Thanks! Full disclosure, this is the revised version of Citadel since it was posted to my subreddit about a month ago now. But thanks TJ for posting it to my subreddit to begin with. I'm sorry it took me so long to get to it. Things have been busy, but I hope you enjoy. I've been assigned to some isolated locations before, but never one this remote. Usually when I'm briefed, it includes my assignment and the duties included. This time, I was handed a map and directions. I knew these three-letter types were cagey, but this thin-lipped pencil pusher may as well have had a vice grip over his mouth. I was to hike out into the mountains that neighbored Death Valley and follow a slot canyon to an old, abandoned gold mine that had been sealed back in 1908. In spite of the pale blue October sky, the heat persisted. I scrambled over loose rock and through scrub brush to higher and higher elevations, searching for some cool reprieve in the form of shade or the cool, thin air that accompanies altitude. I found neither. Letting my feet dangle over a rocky ledge, I sat and reviewed the old mining claim documents that were given to me. The paper was over a century old, faded and yellow. The rudimentary topography laid out in the land claim was clear. I had 8 more miles of scrambling and bushwhacking ahead of me. I looked out over the expansive bowl that lay before me. Low dunes blanketed the feet of the hills I was traversing. Beyond them, the wastes of Death Valley, its floor lined with cracks that sucked desperately for moisture. I took a pull from my water pack and moved on. I was looking for a depression near the top of this unnamed peak. In it would be a spring-fed stream that carved a thin trough through the limestone mountainside. When I found it, the small green oasis that once existed there had long since dried up. Huge bushes, brambles, and small trees, now brown and desiccated. But the slot canyon that I needed was there, and it was narrower than I had anticipated. I took off my pack, turned sideways, and inched my way forward. It was agonizing and slow. At times it became so narrow that my breaths came in shallow bursts. My stomach and back were touching the walls. I had to fight the panic that was rising up within me. My pack, down at my side, was growing heavier with every step. I closed my eyes, gritted my teeth, and shimmied as quickly as I could. The walls opened up. I could breathe. As I opened my eyes, my foot caught a stone and the world rose up to meet me. I landed hard on my back at the bottom of a short cliff. I could see my pack about 10 feet above my head. Nursing the spot on my posterior, I stood up carefully. I made my way to the drop-off and jumped hesitantly, yanking one of the straps that had fallen over the edge. With my pack on and my ego thoroughly bruised, I turned to continue down the slope. I was met by a weathered chain-link fence sticking out of the rock. Behind it, a darkness interrupted only by a blinking red dot. Moving closer to the fence, I hid the camera. It sat about 15 feet from the entrance. Unsure of who was watching, I smiled and waved. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back as I stood with my hand in the air. After a moment long enough to make me feel awkward, the fence shook and swung open with an audible buzz. I took a deep breath and accepted the invitation. I walked through the gate, closing it behind me. I heard the lock clamp shut, and an electric hum I had only noticed after its short absence returned. Walking into the mine was a breath of fresh, albeit stale, air. I crept into the pitch-black mine and unholstered my service pistol, activating its flashlight. Old crates of what looked like candlesticks or dynamite littered the floor. Levi's as old as the brand itself lay crumpled in a corner. I followed the minecart tracks, sweeping my light into each corner. I turned around a bend in the shaft and was met with distant light. I holstered my weapon and continued a little less cautiously. The rough-hewn stone that made up the walls evened out into a cinder block tunnel, with sickly fluorescent bulbs lighting the way. The ceilings were high and the hanging lights cast long shadows. My boots echoed as I slapped the poured concrete floor. Someone was waiting for me. At the end of the tunnel was a huge blast door. I had only ever seen one like this inside Cheyenne Mountain. Standing in front of it was the handler who sent me here. As I approached, he smiled without moving his eyes. "Beautiful, isn't she?" he said in the practiced tone of a used car salesman. "Built in 1954 at Eisenhower's request. This bunker was the first of many. So what am I doing here? Let's discuss that inside, shall we?" He pounded a fist on the blast door, and a moment later, it ground to life, lifting itself into a pocket in the ceiling with a labored whirring sound. Inside was an airlock, a small sealed room that led into the facility proper. Listen, the pageantry, while appreciated, seems a little unnecessary. My handler just scoffed and entered, motioning for me to follow. The facility that lay beyond was Spartan, to put it lightly. Corrugated metal walls, dimly lit barracks, a commissary no bigger than a concession stand, all wrapped in a confusing maze of halls that seemingly led to either everywhere or nowhere. We entered an office, where I learned that my handler was, in fact, the station chief of this particular hidey hole. The sterile lights buzzed overhead and feebly coated the room in a yellow cast. "You'll be on guard duty," he said. "A position I've learned that you excel in." "Is this a prison, sir?" "Containment unit." "Pathogens?" "Intelligence asset." "Asset? A person?" "More or less." I filed this information away before continuing. "What should I expect?" "Expect him to bleed," he said. "But don't expect him to die." "Tough son of a bitch, sir?" "Yeah, something like that. The bullets you'll be supplied with will slow him down, but in the event of escape, the entire facility will be flooded with halothane." "Seems a bit extreme for one prisoner," I said. The chief looked at me warily and said nothing. These sorts of jobs, guard duty, were usually the easiest. I'd get rotated in for a few weeks, have a place to lay my head at night, 3 square meals a day, and then I'd get paid after my rotation ended. Is there a high likelihood of an escape attempt? He's tried. Nearly made it to the entrance once. That was before we installed biometric countermeasures. How long has he been here, sir? Longer than you've been alive, son. Anyone I've heard of? Not a chance. My head was brimming with questions, but I suppressed them. He led me to the armory, where I was provided a high-powered automatic rifle and several magazines. Taking a peek into the magazine revealed blue-tip bullets. "Shouldn't these be less lethals?" I asked. "They are," said the chief, his voice steely and cold. He gave me a look that I understood to mean, no more questions. I was then led to a small cubicle, near what looked to be an interrogation room with a single occupant behind wire-impregnated glass. At the desk, monitors provided views of the labyrinthine halls, the entrance, commissary, and of course, the prisoner. Next to them, a laminated sheet of paper with a map of the facility hung thumbtacked to a corkboard. "Monitor his movements. If he says anything, ignore him." I nodded and he continued. "If anything seems off, put in a call to medical. They'll flood the room with gas and secure him." "Where is medical exactly?" "It wasn't on the tour." "Further up the mountain, along with the rest of the facilities and staff. The other guards you'll be switching off with every 12 hours will be the only people inside the containment unit besides yourself. If you need to reach us, call ahead and we'll send someone down." I turned my attention to the monitors. The prisoner was completely nude. His pale skin was stretched tight over sinewy muscle and ropey tendons. His flesh hadn't seen the sun in so long. The only color I could make out were the blues and greens of the blood vessels that snaked over his body. All his sensory organs were grotesquely oversized. Ears like parabolic microphones, eyes the size of billiard balls, a nose that resembled a plague doctor's beak. And that mouth. I could see the muscles in his hairless head working as he clenched his jaw, mindlessly grinding his teeth. The old, yellowed fangs jutted from a mouth that yawned like the abyss. "The fuck is that?" I said, breathless. My eyes were locked on the image. "That is our asset," the chief replied flatly. "All other information is need to know." "Understood," I said, not looking away from the monitor. I heard the chief walk away as I sank into the swivel chair. This is why you don't accept invitations to the desert from strange men. I placed my head in my hands and rubbed my eyes. When I looked back up at the screen, the prisoner was no longer in my feed. I scrubbed through the cameras, but he was gone. I turned my head, only to be greeted by that thing staring at me through the glass panel. Jesus! I jumped back and nearly tripped over my chair. "He has a tendency of trying to unsettle the new guards," came the chief's voice. "We put up two-way mirrors in there, but he can either see through them or hear exactly where you are. Not sure which. Bastard has a way of catching you unaware." He crossed the cubicle to where I was still standing and handed me a remote. "Press the button." When I did, blast shields lowered from the ceiling, hiding the prisoner from view. I looked at the chief. "So you don't have to look at him." With that, he left the room. I sat back down and watched the monitor. The prisoner, asset, creature, whatever the hell it was standing in the center of the room. It was laughing. At least, I think it was. The corners of its gaping hellhole of a mouth had turned up slightly, and its stomach puffed in and out erratically. And I could hear it. It was a wheezing, hissing sound that coughed and spluttered, like years of phlegm and tar working their way out of a smoker's lungs. Except it wasn't coming from the prisoner's quarters. It was in my head. Covering my ears did nothing. A hand wrapped itself around my shoulder and I cried out. I spun around to see a friendly face. Fucking Christ! Rogers? An old friend from my time with the Rangers greeted me. "You'll want to write that down, Brant. Document anything he does to try scaring you." "How the hell are you here?" "Who do you think recommended you for this assignment?" "Hell of a favor you did me." "What the hell is that thing?" "Don't know, don't care. Listen, I know the hike in sucks, so why don't you grab some chow and get off your feet? I'll take over." "All right," I said. "Chief said those were mirrors in there, right?" "Yep," said Rogers. "How come I can't see this thing's reflection?" Rogers gave me a shrug, and I knew I wouldn't get more out of him.